There has been a lot of new HiFi DACs released in the last 3 years, but quite often they can feel like just an incremental improvement on what we have seen before, so it can be quite difficult to get excited about another new DAC release. However, Matrix Audio told me their new ND-1 DAC has a vintage inspired analog sound signature. And how can you not be excited by that? However, I am a skeptical person by nature, and my immediate thoughts were, what does that really mean? And how are they going to deliver it while still satisfying the modern DAC expectation of technical excellence, and some expecting nothing but stellar measurements regardless of musical enjoyment? And I'm all about enjoying music, from it being a very special listening experience that only a great hi-fi system can deliver. But that's a topic for another video. Except it's apt here, because the ND-1, it can be that technical DAC if you want it to be, but I don't know why you would, when instead you can choose for it to be a musically enjoyable DAC. But let's start at the beginning with the aesthetics, because I think the Matrix 1 series are some of the nicest styled hi-fi products I have had here. They have a clean, modern look with a real class act about them. I think the word elegant is the most appropriate one I can think of, even down to the fonts and the text size and how it's positioned on the top of the casework. It's all just lovely. And even the metalwork is finished to a higher standard and is nicer than the typical brushed metal finish we see on a lot of hi-fi, with more elegant visual touches that I appreciate, such as the sleek logo on the front and the small and sleek again power button. And yes, the ND-1 doesn't have a fancy screen like an Eversolo Z10, but I can't help but really like the understated nature of the front design, with the black gloss bar and how the touch sensitive small buttons illuminate just enough, but not too much to be visually jarring when listening with the lights dimmed. Then the top plate and the holy sides, all Matrix 1 series products share this same design, and I appreciate that consistency. And the holes provide some necessary ventilation, as the ND-1 runs quite warm, which is often a sign for a high quality analog output in my experience. And even the connections on the rear make sense to me. There is the IIS, LVDS, I2S, which is my preferred input from the Matrix NT1 transport. And I appreciate there is both USB Type B and Type C for modern and legacy hi-fi cable users. There is a balanced digital, a coax, and optical, so I have no complaints here for connectivity. However, some might have wanted a HDMI ARC connection, of course. There is both single-ended and balanced outputs, with very little difference between them for their sound quality. I would choose balanced, but would be happy using either, making the ND-1 flexible for the preamps that you can use with it, and I appreciate that. And I must not forget to mention the 10 MHz clock input, as that will become super important much later in the review. Popping the hood and looking inside tells us so much about how the ND-1 is different to any other DAC that I've listened to before, and I wonder if it will be obvious to you why. What stood out to me is again the elegance of the internal layout and overall design, with several key things standing out to me, such as the large, potted, I believe, multi-winding toroidal transformer for a linear power supply, the many, and some quite large, high-end, to my best understanding, EL&A capacitors, and there are a lot of them being used here, and how the lower section is for digital and the raised section is for analog. And here we see the first thing that is different. The ND-1 is using AKM's flagship chips, the AK4499EX and the AK4191EX, but used in a 1+2 configuration, and I have not seen that before. I have only seen these chips used in a 2+2 configuration, such as inside the Eversolo Z10 and the HiFi Rose RD160. So the use of a 1+2 configuration, my initial thought was, would that be better? Would that be worse? Would we lose anything or gain anything? Well, we definitely didn't lose anything, as you'll see shortly when we get to the comparisons. And the second, and really the most standout aspect of the ND-1's analog design, is in its outputs, because you can choose to use either op amps, which is pretty normal, and matrix say this will give you a sound with clean lines, fast transients and precise details. Or instead you can choose transformer coupling of the signal via Landau output transformers. And matrix say this is for a warm and analog-like sound signature. And I've never heard a DAC with this type of design before, so that is exciting. And one more thing to mention are the isolation feet called MA Damper Pro. And they use a multi-layer principle combining cork, stainless steel, rubber, isolation beads and aluminium. So I can't help but appreciate this extra attention to detail. I think considering everything, the price of the ND-1 is pretty reasonable in the modern high-end DAC market, and its price is £2,895, which is of course a lot of money, and actually a fair bit more than an Ever Solo Z10, but about the same price as a Gustard R30 and about £1,000 less than a HiFi Rose RD160. All DACs I have here now, so all great comparisons. But before I talk about sound quality and the comparisons, I think it's important to look at the 4 different ways the ND-1 is flexible with its sound. And the first way is similar to what we see on most DACs that have different filter options we can choose between. Instead of having technical jargon names that mean very little to a non-engineer, let's be honest, how much better is it to have descriptive terms that we can understand? And they're classified as a sound color, which again, we can understand. So mode 1 is mellow, and that just seems to ease off the highs and ease off the bass just a little bit for a more easygoing sound. And that differs from analog that just rolls off the highs a little bit, or seems to roll off the highs a little bit, just for a more smooth, a more easygoing listen. And that differs from detail, which seems to raise the high frequencies a little bit for a more detailed sound. And that differs from dynamic that seems to raise the bass a little bit for a more punchy, more bold sound. And they all differ from natural, which seems to leave the music alone. And that differs from analytical, which actually I didn't listen to. And I think the analytical mode probably should be called disgusting, because that is how I feel about an analytical hi-fi sound. I'm just joking, of course. But I do think it's great to have easy to understand descriptive terms that, translate into some difference in the sound quality. And I ended up choosing natural for the majority of my listening, and that is important to note. And the second flexibility is with the voltage of the analog output. From the factory, this is set a little hotter than normal, 2.25 volts for RCA and 4.5 volts for balanced. But you have the option to change it back to a normal level of 2 and 4 volts if your preamp doesn't like the higher voltage. Now, I expected this change to maybe just affect the volume a little bit, but it didn't. I noticed some difference in sound. With the higher voltage, I found the sound was a little bit warmer. It was a little bit more full, a little bit more bold in the bass, and I like that. There maybe was some trade-off to a loss of soundstage space, but that is a trade-off I'm always willing to take. So I listened all the time with the higher voltage setting, again for a bit more of a full and solid sound. The third way is with upsampling or converting all music to DSD. And you can adjust the amount this happens, and matrix say this is for enhancing the sound density. But I did not engage this for the review. And lastly is the most exciting option, and what I have affectionately nicknamed as the glory button. As we know, there is the option to choose either the transformer or op amps for the analog output, and you select between them with the glory button. And the reason I'm calling it that, just like a light-hearted kind of joke really, but meant for a particular reason, is because if you listen to the ND-1 using the op amps, you get a very good, very enjoyable, very clean sound. But it's also maybe just a little bit normal. It's like a normal DAC sound, which is totally fine and very good. However, when you engage the transformer coupling, well then you do get more musical glory. Now, whether that's something being added to the music through a distortion that's added like a vacuum tube does, or if it's something that we now hear that is lost with the op amps, I do not even care, because it doesn't matter, because we can choose either. And I always chose the glory. And to describe the sound difference is not actually that easy because I think there's a bit more to it than the transformer coupling just making the sound warmer and a bit more analog like. That to me is a little bit too loose. What I found was music was just more interesting to listen to on the micro level, so small things, but also the macro level, the general presentation of the music was much more interesting with the transformer coupling enabled. So please take into account all of these choices as I now speak about sound quality. And I'm going to start with the treble because it's particularly nice from this DAC with a huge emphasis on nice because the treble balances a sparkly, crisp and quite lively nature with some softness and sweetness. The balance of both is excellent. And the treble being presented lively and crisp and clear, but just a little softer and a little sweeter, I really like the balance of, because when you listen to music that's even a little bit extra kind of trebly, that treble doesn't dominate your ear. It doesn't grab your attention or stand out too much in part as part of the balance of the rest of the music. And that means I can listen to less well produced music and still very much enjoy it. And it also means I can listen louder without getting listening fatigue. However, when I switch my ear brain to focus on the treble, all the details are there. They're crisp, they're lively, and they're smooth, and they're slightly sweet, and a bit just a touch mellow. And I really like that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the bass was pretty big, definitely solid and full, and very articulate, impressively so. And I liked the mid-bass impact for drums as they hit nicely, and electronic music had plenty of punch and bounce, and I of course liked that a lot too. And for the vocals, there was definitely a nice tone and pleasing character to how they sounded, male and female, all different types of vocals. Always just a little bit of something, some character and some pleasing qualities to them. But when it comes to like fullness and warmth of vocals, there was enough there again for that character for them to sound nice, but not too much to the point where they sound kind of a bit too thick and smothered. So it was just a nice balance again. Lots of clarity, lots of clear details, but just a bit more character to them. And the reason why I like that is because it makes digital music sound less digital. And how can that not be a good thing? And the good news continues into the soundstage, which was very impressive, very nicely organised and well timed. And with the transformer coupling engaged, the sense of 3D to the soundstage was definitely enhanced some, which is a big part of why I liked it. And it also adds some charm and maybe a touch more realism to how instruments and music sounds within its space. And there is definitely a sense of calm to the sound of the ND-1. Don't get me wrong, dynamic when it needs to be, but calmness for the rest. And that makes digital music sound less tense. And tension, intention or aggression in digital music is one of the worst things about some digital setups. So having like a calm, relaxed digital sound is again a very good thing. Now I should clarify that I have two Matrix products here. I also have their new NA1 preamplifier and headphone amplifier that you would have seen sat on my racks. But the reason I used it for this review is it allows me to connect balanced to a DAC. And that is perfect for all the comparisons I was looking to do. Starting simple with a comparison to the Gustard R30. And the Gustard costs about the same, and it also has a very interesting design. It's a high quality R2R DAC with a fully discrete output, and it's a very good DAC that I already know excels with clarity. It has a very open, spacious soundstage with excellent timing and a very nice, smooth flow to the music in the main. So this was a real test for the Matrix ND-1's quality. And some of you might prefer the Gustard if you prefer music delivered with a more accentuated higher frequencies that definitely stand out more. However, I struggle with the overall sound balance or presentation from the Gustard. It just doesn't speak to me, and I covered this in my review of it. I find it just a bit too analytical. It breaks down the music a little bit too much for me, and it's just a bit too analytical for my personal taste. And actually, in this comparison, I much preferred the Matrix ND-1 in every regard, in the bass, in the treble, in the soundstage to some degree, or just the general presentation. Vocals, I would say, were about on par from both of these DACs, so very good quality. But where I noticed the biggest difference was the Matrix ND-1 made the Gustard sound a little mechanical, and I definitely did not expect that. But it's situations like this that have made me think about digital systems a little differently, where I'm comparing all products from one manufacturer, so a transport and a DAC, compared to a mix and match. I've found that quite often I prefer the sound balance of the whole system, or just how the system sounds, when the products match, when they're from the same manufacturer. And that has made me think about the importance of a digital system sound synergy, which I appreciate sounds like crazy talk. But when you've done the amount of comparisons and have the number of systems I have here, this has started to stand out to me. So that is what I wanted to test next. And that meant comparing the Matrix NT and ND-1 to the HiFi Rose RS130 and RD160, and comparing them to the Eversolo T8 and Z10. And I think when you're considering or comparing full systems, more things become important than just sound quality. System aesthetics is one. And all three of these are nice looking digital systems. Two that are majoring on screen quality, with the RS130 being extra special in that regard. But as a matching set of components, the Matrix are the only ones that do match. And I think that looks better. However, the Rose RD160 and its fancy hidden screen and the overall design is particularly nice. So that wins the individual best looking award, but I think the Matrix wins the best aesthetics for a whole system. And then we have app control to think about. And HiFi Rose recently released a new app that makes a big improvement. It's like a much more simplified app to use. However, Eversolo probably wins for the app for features and flexibility. However, there are standout things I like about all three apps, the HiFi Rose app, MA Player, and the Eversolo. So I think it's very close between them. So then we have to think about price, and we have to think or consider you can buy a whole Eversolo system for less money than either the Matrix or HiFi Rose transports cost on their own. So the Eversolo is the much more affordable and therefore the more accessible system without losing any features or connectivity, barring one thing which I'll overlook for now. So that is very important. So it does end up coming down to sound quality and whether the Matrix or Rose systems do enough to justify their higher costs. And it's been a while since I've had the all Rose digital system in my HiFi system, but it only took me a minute to remember why I like it so much and why it's still here. It's a fantastic sounding digital setup. Now, in truth, all three of these are fantastic sounding setups. So it's in the nuances of difference that ends up separating them. The Rose pairing sounds very obviously big, powerful, solid, lively and dynamic. Like the analog output from the DAC is huge, even at the standard 4 volt for balance. But it can go up to 9 volts, so the analog output stage is a beast, and I think you can hear that in music having a lot of energy and drive, and that makes modern and especially electronic music very engaging and fun. And maybe sometimes the Rose setup can be a bit heavy-handed, maybe a little bit forceful with the music delivery, but that feels like a pretty minor criticism really when you've got big, driving, energetic sound delivery, vocals that are really clean and nice to listen to. The highs are the same, sound stage is very good, so you don't really have much to complain about. I don't have much to complain about with that system. It's nitpicking because it's a fantastic sounding system, and I think it probably does justify its higher cost because of that sound quality and the very lovely build of both products. So switching then to the full Eversolo system, there is of course a lot that is similar, and I'm sure many would think the Eversolo more than holds its own with the much more expensive Rose system, given that huge price difference. However, listening back to back, there was something missing or just something that was not quite the same. And I've been struggling to put my finger on it, but I think it's a number of small things that affect the overall refinement and experience. Such as the high frequencies from the Eversolo are very clear, but maybe a little bit more edgy than from the Rose. And the bass is very full from the Eversolo setup, but it's not as dynamic or maybe as effortlessly dynamic as from the Rose. And the vocals from the Eversolo are fantastic, but they're maybe not as impactful as from the Rose. So again, it's nuances of difference, but these are the important nuances. However, I've already found that I prefer the sound quality from the Eversolo T8 and Z10 than when I introduced the Gustard R30, which brings me back to that digital system synergy situation that I mentioned before. So next I wanted to find out how the matrix compares to the Rose, because these systems cost about the same, and listening to the matrix now was a sharp reminder why doing comparisons like this is so important, as it's very easy to get wrapped up in the joy of new products, but when you revisit an old favourite, you realise selecting digital hi-fi products is often mostly about the nuances in the presentation that you prefer, because there is still the same difference between the Rose and Matrix setups I have reported on previously. The Rose is definitely the more bold, the more lively, the more upfront sounding of the two, and I do really enjoy that. Whereas the Matrix system is a bit more resolute, it's a bit more relaxed and calm, less driving and attacking, a bit more calm and a bit more resolute. And it's probably not as full and bold sounding, but because of that, it's a little bit more spacious and a little bit more graceful with its presentation. So it's difficult for me to say one is outright better than the other, or even which one do I prefer. I would say they're both about at the same kind of quality level, they're just different in presentation. And what that would probably dictate is what system, like preamplifier and amplifier, I would use with them to get the end sonic result, the sound quality I would be looking for. So what are my takeaways from all of this comparison listening? Well, it seems like I am an AKM Velvet DAC chip fan, as all three of my preferred DACs use that technology, and I've never really thought about that before. But even with three DACs using the same AKM chips, there are still differences and nuances between them. And that is where my take on digital system synergy is coming from, and also from a recommendation point of view. Because of course you can put together any digital system that you want and it's going to sound great. That's not really what I'm kind of looking at and getting here. If you ask me today, I would probably recommend to someone that they pick a lane, whether that's the Matrix lane or the Ever Solo lane and the Hi-Fi Rose lane, and build your digital system based on matching manufacturer products. Because I do think, because I did some mix and matching listening and it's still always great, but I don't think it was quite the same. I think I got, from a nuances point of view, I think the nuances made more sense with the matching manufacturer products used together. But lastly, I wanted to test the piece de la resistance, and Google that phrase if you don't know what I mean. I tested the Matrix system, but now with the SC1 reference clock added. And if you're unsure what this is and does, check out my review as I explain it all in detail. But in short, the SC1 was connected to both the NT1 and ND-1 and acted as an extremely high accuracy 10 MHz reference clock to both. And I know there will be many people skeptical of a product like this. However, I simply recommend don't prejudge it. If you get the chance, try one out and see what you think. Because the difference the SC1 clock made was, I'm just going to say it, it was huge, absolutely huge. No hyperbole, it was huge because it fixes and improves things you don't even realize need fixing and improving. I really love what the SC1 does for bass spatiality, the way bass notes form in and around the room. Here it was improved the smoothness of the music and the tonality of the music as well, and just the general 3D spacious presentation of the music in my room. And that's probably the one that stands out to me the most. And that is why the SC1 was my best digital product of 2025. And it does take the sound quality from the ND-1 and the NT-1 up to that next level. I appreciate that's an audiophile thing to say, but it's the truth, up to that next quality level. And that's, I think, very useful to know if you're considering a full Matrix 1 system. So summing things up there, the ND-1 is an excellent DAC from Matrix that sounds great and is flexible in its sound, which is even more great, and it looks lovely and it's compact and it has great connections. So it is the full package and well worth considering on its own, even in a very crowded market. And it's especially worth considering as part of a full Matrix 1 system with the NT-1 and the ND-1 and the NA-1 and the SC1 and maybe even the MA-1 power amplifier, or two of them in bridged mono. That's the only product I think so far I haven't listened to or seen from Matrix that I'm really interested in. I'd love to compare one or really two of those to my big esoteric. That would be a fun comparison to do. So I hope this review has been helpful and interesting. If you have enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button and of course, subscribe to the channel to see more.